We took a poll at IG here of some of our top clients, and it came back with the expectation that Joe Biden could well win the US election by a margin of 70 to 30. Let's now catch up with what this sort of result could mean for Brexit. We're now with Robert Oulds from the Bruges Group. Robert, good to talk to you. Just before we get into Brexit and the outcome of the US election, your thoughts on that possible outcome, a 70% chance of a Biden win? How's that make you feel?
Well, I think it's highly unlikely that Biden will win the election. Trump will win big. Republican voters are super energized and turning out in massive numbers to vote for President Trump, whereas the Democrat voters are not enthused. These polls that predict that Biden is winning the US election so far, which is already underway, assume that there's a low Republican turnout. That's just highly unlikely and doesn't really match the data on the ground, which is actually showing really strong Republican turnout. So I think Trump will win.
This is interesting, isn't it? Because 4 years ago, of course, we got Hillary Clinton taking the lion's share of the vote. I think she won by 3 or 4 million votes, I think, didn't she? But in fact, when it all came out in the electoral college system, it turned around and Donald Trump was able to take the White House. Do you think that sort of situation could arise again then, where we do actually have more people voting Democrat, but ultimately the way they count the votes means that it will return Trump? Or do you think Trump's going to win even on a majority vote?
There is actually a chance that Trump will actually win the majority of votes. More people will vote for him than for Joe Biden, unlike, of course, in 2016, of course, where Hillary Clinton racked up a whole host of votes in California and New York. The situation in America is now very different. Of course, yes, people are concerned about coronavirus, but people want to look forward to the future. Donald Trump has a very good record until recently on the economy. That will weigh heavily with people's minds. And in the swing states as well, Biden's policies, which are anti-fossil fuels, will actually alarm voters in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and so seats like that. So I think the battleground seats will go for Trump. The seats he took, for the estates he took in 2016, will go for Trump, and perhaps he might even make some inroads into places like New Mexico, which could in fact swing. But I think Trump will win, contrary to the polls, because of course the polls are not really being realistic.
I do want to go to the Brexit subject in just a minute, if I can. One final question on the situation we have at the moment on the election. Are you saying, do you think that the experiences we've had recently with COVID-19, is that going to dent Donald Trump's appeal or not? Because I've been hearing that ultimately, in fact, if we'd had the election before the coronavirus struck, yes, he would possibly have won. That seems to have been the expected outcome at that point. But here we are now, 6 or 7 months into this pandemic. It doesn't look like it's going to be over anytime soon. There's been a lot of criticism about the way it's been handled by the Trump White House. Do you see that this could actually make a dent in what would otherwise have been a relatively simple, straightforward vote in favour of Trump pre-COVID?
Well, there is the factor that people, because these are uncertain times, won't want to be changing administration at a time of uncertainty. There's another factor that comes into play, which is perhaps more important. The Democrats have taken this whole situation regarding COVID-19 very seriously and have next to no ground game. They're campaigning and door to door, meeting real people face to face, and in terms of rallies are almost non-existent, where the Trump campaign has always been one of very much grassroots. So when it comes to people voting, particularly a lot of postal voting, it will be the Republicans who will be going around door to door, knocking, meeting real people, collecting the postal votes from their supporters, identifying those supporters, getting them to vote, getting them to turn out as they are already. And that will make a huge difference. So conversely, I really do think that the coronavirus and the pandemic and all the problems that this has created will actually play in Trump's favour.
Okay, let's move on to the subject of Brexit. I know that you, as a group, obviously have very robust views on this, and the possibilities for the UK economy outside of the European Union. We spoke to you about this before, and we know your position. What preparations do you think we should make if indeed the Biden win comes about in terms of Brexit? How different a Brexit could this be if it's not a Trump victory?
Well, some have speculated that a Biden victory would be actually really damaging for Brexit because the Democrats, looking for the Irish American vote, have taken a strong position on the issue of the border, Britain's border through Northern Ireland with the Republic of Ireland, which has been a sort of major contention with just not the Irish as well, but also the European Union. And Nancy Pelosi has said that they will not agree to a trade deal with the UK unless that issue is fixed, which currently it seems that Britain is doing most of what it can to make sure there isn't going to be any kind of trade barriers on the island of Ireland. But of course, that's by no means certain as yet. However, I do feel that this is just rhetoric coming from the Democrats, because ultimately the biggest investors in Britain and the biggest investors in the United States are both Britain and America. We've got such a close business relationship that once this election is out the way and once the wrangling is over, that even a Biden administration will come to a trade deal with the UK. We don't really have, I think, much to fear, because business talks, money talks, and the business of America is business. And that's why they'll come to an agreement. It makes total sense to have a trade deal with the United Kingdom. However, there would be short-term effects in Britain and with the European Union, because the European Union will double down their efforts to make Britain comply with their agenda, to make sure that we sign up to their trade deal, which would be one of Britain conforming to European Union standards going forward, and not having our own state aid policy, and let alone control of our own fishing waters. They will push back hard, thinking that a Biden victory is in their interest, although in the long run it won't be.
Well, if that comes about, I mean, word seems to be from Lord Frost at least that if it's that difficult, then the UK will walk away. Let's assume that we get a breakdown in talks and we're faced with a Biden victory. I've been hearing that there's a chance that Joe Biden could actually then sign up to something that Donald Trump didn't want to do, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. In other words, this is a trading bloc. And I think it would be the largest trading bloc in the world, especially if the States was to join it. Would that then not be an opportunity for the UK to join that as a trading bloc? Okay, it's leaving what some might regard as the frying pan into the fire, because you're talking then about another trading bloc with other regulations imposed upon it. Do you see that as a possible way forward, and that if the TPP does get the United States, the UK could join as well?
But on the point of walking away, I think a Biden victory makes it less likely that we would walk away from what the EU demands, because where would we walk away to? We would have potentially one less place. Well, after all, that would be resolved eventually, but in the short term, it would create jitters. Now, there are other options around the world and other countries we can sign trade deals with, such as the excellent work that's been going on with Japan recently. Agreeing a trade deal with the Pacific bloc would indeed make sense. Britain joining is not realistic, but there's no reason why Britain can't negotiate some kind of trade deal with that. Of course, so far, Britain has been following a more sort of approach where we've been sort of agreeing deals with individual nations, such as like I mentioned with Japan, and there'll be a whole host of other options around the world. New Zealand, of course, are others, as is Australia. But Britain is so far focusing on negotiating with individual countries rather than other blocs. There's no reason why an independent UK, if we did walk away from the EU, we're unencumbered by their rules and we're able to adjust our economy and our regulatory base as we see fit, could actually make deals with numerous other countries and blocs. So yes, that is an option. Joining, no, it is highly unlikely, but having a trade agreement, well, why not? Actually, that's what Brexit is ultimately all about. It's about Britain being independent, but also about going into the rest of the world and negotiating deals. Whether we can do a better deal, negotiate a better arrangements than what the EU offers is yet to be seen. But of course, that is actually the principle that we can try and forge new links with other countries and blocs around the globe.
What do you think about the coronavirus effect on all this as well? I mean, we're talking about the US election, but I want to bring in the pressures being brought to bear upon not just the UK economy, across Europe and indeed across the world. We've got governments trying to fund people that are out of work because of the coronavirus. The coronavirus has dampened down the economy to the effect that we've got almost stasis in many economies around the world. Does the coronavirus change the dynamic in your mind for Brexit?
it arguably helps Brexit because the European Union is in a parlous state. It means that the European Union, of course, is even more indebted than what it was before. It means that their economies are incredibly fragile, and to lose access to the UK's market would be a disaster for the European Union. German automakers want a deal. German and other European industries want to have a trade deal with the United Kingdom. So there has to be some degree of minds coming together. So in a sense, it makes a deal far more likely, and it means that there'll be a greater likelihood of trade deals because it is pretty much established that free trade and access to other people's markets actually helps the economy grow. That is rather orthodox thinking amongst economists. The days of protectionism are over. There may be trade disputes in some areas, but a great deal of protectionism emerging is a fear that's proved to be unfounded. Countries still want to make trade deals. And with the parlous state of the economy, the global economy, even with all these problems with coronavirus, it does indeed put extra pressure on politicians to swallow their pride and come to an agreement. And of course, another benefit could be that any disruptions caused by Brexit and any failure to have a deal with the European Union pale into insignificance to the massive problems that the lockdown has created and how the economy for some time ceased to be functioning, at least declined massively, biggest in record. So it really does put things into perspective as well.
Okay, look, Robert, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much indeed for joining us for this look at the effects of some of the pressures on the British economy around the Brexit deal. That's Robert Oulds from the Bruges Group.